Hello and welcome everyone. In this video, I'm going to talk about what things you need to know before buying a land lot. This is the overview of what I'll be talking about: types and purposes of buying a land lot, things to consider before you buy the land lot, legal documents, and finally the process. Alright, so let's talk about types of land that are available for sale. These are the main two types of land: developed land and undeveloped land. Developed land are usually put on for sale by real estate companies, and they modify the land to a state where you can straight away build your house in it, and they usually take care of resolving the legal issues and arranging loan facilities and all. But the downside is that the price of these developed land are somewhat high, and in the other hand, undeveloped lands are directly sold by the owners or brokers, and their prices are lower. And also, unlike in the developed lands, you will get the trees and any other resources inside the land to use as you want. uh, but you have to manually figure out if the land is good for its price, and if its legal side is fine. And this session is more about explaining what you need to consider when you are buying an undeveloped land. Okay, then let's start talking about what things you need to know before buying a land. This is going to be a somewhat long list, but it will be useful to know about each of them. The first one is the shape of the land. The shape of the land is one of the most important things to consider when you are buying a land. And the most perfect shape for a land is the rectangular shape or the square shape. But practically, when we are searching for lands, we usually encounter lands like what I have shown in the right side. If you can look at this picture, so the value of this area of the land is not equal to the value of this area of the land, because when the width of the land gets thinner and thinner, then you cannot utilize that area to build your house. And if you look at this picture as well, you will have problems to utilize this space when you're building your house. So the point is, you can negotiate with the seller, talking about this width of the land, if it is too much narrow. Next one is the incline of the land. When you're buying a land, it's best to buy a flat land, but then again, there are many lands that we encounter which are not flat and which has a slope across the span of the land. So before you do anything, you have to do some filling in the land if you buy such a land. There are two ways that you can build a house in a land which is not flat. In either way, you have to build a stone wall and do some filling work before you do anything. So at the end of the day, this will cost some amount of money. So it's best to avoid buying this kind of lands. But if you buy such a land, you can negotiate with the seller and reduce the price that you have to spend for this additional work. Next, we have the terrain of the land. Here what we are looking at is whether the land surface is rough. Even if you find a flat land, if the surface is rough, then you have some additional work to do before you do anything on top of the land. Next one is the orientation of the land. This is actually something that many people do not give a concern about. This actually comes into play when you are designing the architecture of the house. If you look at the first picture here, the sunlight is available for this smaller side only. But if you look at the second picture, the sunlight will be available throughout this longer side. So in the first case, you might need to design the house so that you can get more sunlight inside the house. This might not be a very crucial factor, but it's good to know about this as well. And the next one is the soil quality and the soil composition. Actually, I'm not an expert on this area, but I think most of the elders have a very good understanding about this. So the idea is the land you are trying to buy can have different types of soil, and some of them are suitable to build a house straight away, and some of them need some extra work before building a house. For example, for muddy soil or rubble soil, you may have to do some extra work beforehand. Next one is the drainage of rainwater. This is actually a very important thing to consider before you buy the land. If the land you are buying is in a below level than all the other surrounding lands, it's good to avoid buying that land, because you got nothing to do with the incoming rainwater from the other lands or the road, and the water from your own land for that matter, and you will have to just sit and wait until they are vaporized. So before you buy any land, have a look whether the water from the road or from the other surrounding lands are directed towards your land. And the next one is the elevation of the land. This is actually has to do with the flooding. If the land you are trying to buy is located very low compared to the surrounding area, or if there's a river or some kind of canal flowing nearby, it's a good idea to check if the land gets flooded in heavy rain. Next one is the access to the land. Obviously, there should be a proper and a clear road to get into the land. Other than that, if you have to travel in a very narrow lane for a half a kilometer or so, then it will not be an easy task when you're traveling daily in a private vehicle. And also, it's a good idea to check the distance to the nearest bus halt, even if you are using your private vehicle. And nowadays, people usually consider how far away is the land from the nearest highway entrance as well. And the next one is the access to utilities. This is actually a basic thing. You need to check if the pipe water and electricity and telephone cables are available to the land. And one thing that some people forget is the mobile coverage. It is a very important thing to consider because you don't want to climb a tree or something to give a phone call. In addition to those services, people usually consider the distance to the nearest hospital or school, the nearest supermarket, petrol station, and things like that as well. Next, we have the neighborhood. This is something I personally give a big concern about. If you buy a land from a neighborhood which does not match your lifestyle, it will be really hard for you to live there. So it's very important to find out if the people living around are calm and like-minded. For example, some people like to live in a very noisy world, and some others want you to get involved in anything that happens around the neighborhood, and there can be various types of people. In addition to the people, you need to see if there are noisy workshops or religious institutes, and some other institutes like mass tuition classes and things like that. So if the neighborhood is not matching to your lifestyle, it's a good idea to find a place from somewhere else. The next point is having clear borders around the land. It is very important to see if the land has clear borders before you buy it. There can be things like wells, big trees, or some other constructions that span across your land and some of the adjacent lands. Or there can be cases where the border is not clearly defined. The seller will tell you that you can resolve with the neighbors anytime, but you have to make sure that the border is 100% clear. Uh, Otherwise, we all know even minor border issues can lead to court cases. So this is a very important thing. Next one is having clear legal documents. A land has certain types of documents that we should know about, and I'll talk about these documents in detail in the next section. So the point here is you need to check if the land has clear documents before buying that. Okay, so the last point in this list is price. If you get all the previous points in a preferable state, then you might not want to look at the price tag. Actually, if you get all the previous points in a good manner, and if the price is low, then there can be some other issue with that land. Maybe the land is haunted or something. So the idea is it's not practical to get all these things right. You have to sacrifice some of the previous things and use them to negotiate the price with the seller, and it's up to you to decide what things you need and what things you do not need from that land. Anyway, before you negotiate the price with the seller, you need to do a research on the average price per perch in that area. For that, you can talk with some of the people in the area, or you can check the newspapers or the advertisements in the internet and things like that. All right, now let's talk about the legal documents related to a land. But before going into details, I need to tell you something. I'm only giving you a rough idea about these documents to get an overall picture. Um, I'm speaking to the best of my knowledge from what I have read and discussed with several lawyers. So it's necessary to contact a lawyer and discuss about these things when you are actually buying a land. Okay, so generally when buying a land, we talk about four types of documents: survey plan, deed, folio detail documents, and the title report. These four documents represent different aspects of a land, and let's have a look at each of them one by one. First one is the survey plan. This contains all the physical details about the land, and this document is prepared by a licensed surveyor after surveying the land lot. So some of the details in this document include the sketch of the land lot. That's actually the drawing of the land's shape and its boundaries. And right below that you can find the scale of the sketch. Then there is a description about the boundaries of the land and their sizes. And it has the name and location of the land as well, and it contains the references that are used in the plan document. In the top of the plan, you can find the plan number. You can also find the survey date and the details of the surveyor. And finally, we have the most important thing, the details of approval with the seal. This should be obtained by the relevant urban council or the Pradeshya Sabha office by the owner of the land. And there are some government imposed regulations to follow when let's say merging two lands or dividing a land into multiple lots. For example, if the divided lot is smaller than a certain size, they might not approve this land. Or else, if the land is located near a main road, you are not allowed to do any construction work within 20 or 50 feet from that road. And then you will have no space to build your house. Those restrictions will be mentioned in the plan with the approval details. But if you buy a land which is not approved, you will have to face troubles when you get the when you try to get the approval for your house plan, or when you try to resell this land. So it's really important to check if the plan is approved and show the plan to a lawyer before you buy it. This is how a survey plan looks like. This is actually a draft. I didn't include the real one because there can be confidential information. So you can see the things I mentioned above in this document. Next we have the deed, or in Sinhala we call it Oppua. A deed is registered in the relevant land registry in the area, and it contains the deed number, registration details, folio references, and descriptive detail about the ownership. And it also has the names and signatures of the witnesses, and the date of attestation, and the signatures of the buyer and the seller as well. uh, and this is how a draft of a deed looks like. uh, Here the deed type can be either a transfer or a deed of gift. and I think there can be some other types as well. And in this first page you can find all this information, and usually a deed contains multiple pages, and in the last page there are the signatures of the buyers and sellers and the witnesses. The third type of document is the folio details. This usually contains details about the history of the land. That means how and when the land was derived from the parent land, and also it has details about who owned it at different times and how it was inherited or transferred to different owners. You can see if the land is involved in a mortgage of a bank and whether it has been released from the bank or not, and you can see if any property inside the land had been rented out, and also it will tell you if there had been any court order involving this landlord. Basically all the history is there, and you can find out if buying this land will put you in trouble or not. You need to ask a lawyer to check if everything is good up to at least 30 years of history. There are several ways you can do this. You can get the folio numbers from the deed and go to the land registry and get the individual folio detail documents by yourself. If I go a little bit backwards, uh, so in this section of the deed, the folio detail reference numbers are also mentioned, so you can get those and get the folio documents by yourself, or else you can ask a lawyer to perform a search of 30 years of history about this land. And usually according to what the lawyers say, if the land had been in a mortgage and released from a bank, that is actually a positive thing, because banks do not accept deeds which have issues. This is a draft of how a folio document page looks like, and you can see the number of the folio document, references to the previous document, and details about the landlord, and a set of records describing what happened in the previous years. And finally there is the reference to the next document. Finally there's the title report. Title usually relates to the ownership of land, so this report contains information about how the ownership had been transferred. This is a document that you have to get if you are going for a bank loan to get or buy this land. Otherwise, if you are buying this land for cash directly, then you might not need this document. Okay, now we are in the final section, the process of buying the land. These are the initial steps you need to do. You need to find the suitable land with the help of what we discussed in the second section, and then you need to do a research about the prices of land in that area. Then you have to negotiate the price with the seller and come to a final agreement. And then if there are no clear borders visible in the land boundaries, or if you are not satisfied with the boundaries, you can ask the seller to survey the land again, and you can also participate for that. This is actually an additional step, and you need to decide whether you really need this step, because if the seller finds another buyer who does not demand for this step, then he might sell the land to that buyer. But anyway, doing this will make sure that the borders are good. Next step is to verify that the legal documents are clear, and like I said, you need to do this with a lawyer. If you are going for a bank loan, you need to submit these documents to the bank as well. And the steps are getting an approved survey plan from the seller, doing a search about the history of the land, and verifying the documents are clear and the ownership is clear. And the final part is to verify the identity of the seller. This usually happens if the owner of the land is living outside the country. The owner is capable of legally giving the authority to someone else who is living in this country to sell this land on behalf of him. So, in such a case, you need to check if the seller has the proper authority to sell this land. I think your lawyer will know what to do in these kind of situations. And finally, you can go on and purchase the land. You need to pay the seller in front of the lawyer and witnesses representing both the parties. And then you and the seller should sign the transfer documents. You also need to pay the stamp charges and the lawyer fees. The stamp charge is something you pay to the government. Actually, I'm not sure if that is the correct term. And as far as I know, currently, as of today, you have to pay 3% of the land value if the value is less than 100,000 rupees. And for every 100,000 rupee after that, you have to pay 4%. Finally, you need to register the new deed in the land registry. This step is usually done by the lawyer and it will take some time. So that's all I plan to talk about in this video. If you have learned something, please like and subscribe. Thank you very much.